You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast. Today's episode will be a part of our People Leader series, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at and what they really do every day. Hope you enjoy. Greg, welcome to the Modern People Leader. How you doing?
Thank you, Daniel. Glad to be here.
How's the week shaping up? Short week for you?
I love short weeks. Who doesn't love short weeks? So I'll take the extra work and smaller amount of days for sure.
Yeah, it's good. They always feel a little bit chaotic, but I'll take the extra rest. And I have like a little bit of a head cold right now, so it was kind of nice to have a long weekend and then a shorter week.
Agreed. On the East Coast, which is where I am, we're starting to get the weather finally. So we're all out and about smiling again on the East Coast.
It is so hot here in Austin, and we get so apparently in Mexico, once a year they burn, I guess, a bunch of crops, and the smoke makes its way to Texas. So it's been very hazy in Austin the last like 4 or 5 days. Plus, it's been about like 98 degrees with humidity, so it feels like 108, 109. So we do not have good weather right now. So
No. Well, I'm going to try and make you feel better as you start with good news. Our office is in Phoenix, although I'm in the Northeast, and we're at 112 degrees today in Phoenix. So I've got to give you something to feel good about.
That makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah, it's not 112 degrees bad here. It's bad, but it's not that bad.
Do you ever wonder what it means to be a great place to work? Like, what does that even mean? Well, Great Place to Work has cracked the code, hence the name. After 30 years of research and insights from 100 million employees worldwide, they've been able to set the gold standard with their Great Place to Work model. The model pinpoints the experiences and leadership behaviors that boost business success. So if you're curious, whether your people think that your company makes the cut, then I highly recommend joining the 21,000 other companies that have gone through this process and taken the Trust Index survey. It really is the quickest way to figure out whether you're truly a great place to work. And through the data they provide you, you can also find ways to improve things like the employee experience, retention, and productivity. And who knows, depending on what your survey results reveal, your company might just land on one of their best workplaces lists. So if you want to learn more, go to greatplacetowork.com/MPL. That's greatplacetowork.com/MPL. All right, so let's do good news stories. So this is how we start every episode. We all go around and share something that's happened in the last week or two. Could be personal, could be work related, anything that comes to mind. And we like for our guests to go first. So if you have something, we'd prefer that you kick this off.
I can, and I'm going to cheat a little bit and give 1.5 if that's okay. But I'll say one, we just got recertified as Great Places to Work company, which I'll talk about in a minute. So we're super excited about that for our third year in a row. But for our podcast, I'll talk about this week marks, I have 3 young men I call children. All 3 of them actually have a job this week. So that's what I'm celebrating. All 3 of my kids are actually working.
That's awesome. So I'm guessing the youngest just graduated and got their first job.
He's in college, so he's got a summer job, which sounds easy for all of us, but navigating that's a whole nother conversation. So I have one that's a rising sophomore and one's a rising senior in college. They both started their summer jobs this week, and then my oldest is out of school, and thankfully he's doing fine. But there's something about that time where all your young kids or your younger adults, older kids, get out of the house and start making their own paychecks. So that's what I'm celebrating today.
Yeah,
that's huge.
I feel like that's every parent's dream, right? Their kids go to school and they're contributing members of society and have their own job. So that's exciting. I can go next, Stephen, if you want to keep scarfing down that pizza.
Yeah, hit it. It's all you.
So this weekend, I am going to the beach with 2 of my brothers and my grandpa. My older brother had called me probably like 2 months ago, and he was like, we don't have any written or oral history of the family. And while grandpa is, still around, and in really good shape, we should take advantage of that and spend like an entire weekend with him and have him just do like a data dump and record everything.
Awesome.
And I'm a podcaster, so I have all of the equipment. So we have a lot of questions for our grandpa about our family, about the town that he grew up in, about like our dad and like his childhood. I feel like there's a lot of questions, and I feel like this will be a lot of fun just to hang out with him. He called me on my birthday 2 weeks ago, and he was like, Daniel, I'm just so excited for the beach. This is every grandpa's dream to like, get to spend the weekend with their grandchildren. So it should be a fun weekend. And we'll be at the beach.
That's fantastic. And you know, at that age,
Nice.
they didn't have the videos and all the stuff we have now to capture kind
No.
of family history, legacy. And I'm sure he's glowing with the idea of telling you stuff that you can't pull up in a library or a computer.
Yeah, and he's also so he writes for his local newspaper. Back in the day, he was briefly like a radio host. I don't know what exactly the program was, but I guess there's like some radio emceeing like podcast gene. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
He's also part of the Tejano Music Hall of Fame. That's another,
Oh,
yeah, he's a musician as well. Well,
very cool.
that's a perfect segue. My personal, I'm going to be with family this weekend also. So a lot of Huerta time this weekend, all the Huertas. I'm going to be with my dad and my aunt. So I'm looking forward to that. The other thing is also personal, and that is, it's bad news, but I guess I'm turning good out of bad news. And the bad news is my fiance is traveling, and that's tough. And she's going to be gone for like a month. We're meeting up in Amsterdam. So this is by no means a like feel sorry for us situation. And so because of that, when she's not here, I get to do the things that she doesn't do, which primarily involve eating a lot of Thai food. So she has a peanut allergy. So we don't
Mm.
eat a lot of Thai food. So I've had like three Thai meals in the last like 4 or 5 days, and watching scary movies. She does not watch scary movies, and so I get my fill when she's out. So it's going to be a week filled of Thai food, scary movies, and family time. So that's my good news.
There are worse vices out there when your significant other's away, so I think you're doing good.
For real. So that's how I look at it. Like
Yeah.
this is, very like chill stuff. So, you know, this is not about us though, Greg.
Mm.
This is conversation today is about you and experiences you've had. And so, let's start at the beginning. Like how you right before we hit record, I think you were saying how you are a lifer. Like you have been doing this with some various tweaks and I guess different flavors throughout the years, but largely you've been doing, you have been an HR executive, an HR practitioner through and through. And so walk us through your story. Like, what was the journey that led to you becoming the chief people officer at Exos?
Sure. I born and raised upstate New York, youngest of four boys, and so I ended up going to a very small school up there, Niagara University, studying hotel management. And to kind of get through as the fourth child, I was working most of the year while going to school. I ended up at the Hyatt Regency in Buffalo, New York. Long story short, did everything from room service to room cleaning to valet. And the HR director asked me to work in her office for a year, and I ended up working there my sophomore year of college. And from there, I kept working with them. And long story short, I changed my major to HR as a result of her. Her name was Betty. And I was fortunate enough to get a management trainee program from them out of school. I ended up working for Hyatt for 10 years and did progressive roles. I loved it. We used to say, have your ass there tomorrow is what Hyatt stood for. So we moved, and I moved about every 9 to 10 months for the next opportunity, whether that was a union, non-union hotel, big, small, suburb, downtown. So I was very fortunate to move around, learn a lot there, and kind of progress with each move. And then I ended up going with a company that's no longer Starwood Hotels and Resorts. It's now Marriott, but at the time, a gentleman by the name of Barry Sternlick had just acquired Westin and Sheraton hotels and was building what was at the time a very large conglomerate hotel company. Now there's others doing it, but I had another wonderful run there for 8 years doing various HR and ended up doing international HR with Wyndham Hotels and Resorts. And then kind of flipped out of the hospitality space to a little bit of where I am now with a couple other stints of retail and stuff in between it. But for the most part, I worked with a fitness space called Equinox. So we called it a lifestyle company more than a fitness company. I think it still is. And now I'm with a sports performance and now corporate performance coaching company called Exos. And to your point, other than a couple of tries with my regional officers telling me to try being a general manager, I did it in two. I did it with both Starwood at a Sheraton hotel and with Hyatt at a Hyatt hotel. And I would rather deal with the employee complaints than the guest complaints. That was my takeaway. And so each time I gave it a try and came back to kind of what I get up and get excited about every day.
I think you're only our second guest that's had like a pretty extensive hospitality background.
Mm.
Um, Stephen, I'm blanking on, it was from like Virgin Hotel Group. Do you remember her name?
Uh, I'm running a blank also, but yeah, it was Virgin, and now it's a new hotel group that she's working for in New
That's
Orleans, I
right.
think.
Yeah, I think so. So Greg, can you tell us a little bit more about what Exos does? I honestly had never heard of Exos before we asked you to come on to the show, but I went to the LinkedIn page and y'all have like 200,000 followers or something like something crazy like that. I was like, oh wow, like
Yeah.
Exos is a legit brand that I've just never heard of. So can you share a little bit more about what y'all do?
Course, you're not alone with that. I think for our brand for 25 years, it's been really a brand that only elite athletes or agents supporting elite athletes have known. And then prior to the pandemic and since the pandemic, we've become a much broader, diverse company that is largely B2B and largely white label, which is a little bit of why you haven't heard from us. But the way I try and summarize our company Exos is we have 25 years of coaching elite athletes, and the last 5 years coaching C-suites. We, for 25 years, helped athletes figure out performance through movement, nutrition, and recovery. And then during the pandemic and really coming out of the pandemic, part of our business is around wellness solutions and fitness center management for 25% of the Fortune 500 companies. So we work around the world in their offices, in their locations with our employees. And coming out of the pandemic, people were coming back to work, they're solving hybrid. What we quickly realized was this whole problem that they had from home is really only getting more complicated trying to get back into the office full-time, part-time. And where we've spent the last real 3 years has been bringing performance to the corporate offices, to the C-suite. And a lot of that is kind of rethinking what today's workforce, or what a lot of people are calling the future of work. And then a lot about what you all talk about, which is how do you become an effective people leader in today's environment with today's workforce. And as we've had more and more engagements with our current clients, they've asked us to come in and spend time with their C-suites. And so that's why I use the term going from coaching athletes to coaching C-suites.
And I imagine that you're also into nutrition and fitness. Is that true? Is that a
Yes,
fair
there's
assumption?
a very good link for me. I think in the hospitality business, I love to travel. In the fitness and sports space, I love both of those. And that's been a big part of my life for ever since I can remember.
Yeah, we're both very focused on fitness and wellness. And so, that was one of the excitement that we had leading up to this conversation with you. So really looking forward to drilling down into that a little more here in a sec. But before we do that, so, why should we be jealous that you get to work at Exos? What's the secret sauce over there?
Well, we call ourselves proud nerds. So I'll start with the fact that we have a group of scientists here who study the human body and the performance of a human body. That's pretty cool. But you add that to the fact that we apply it to how all of us show up and work in and out and show up in and out of work is a pretty cool thing. And so, as I mentioned, starting this, we're excited about how we get recognized. But more importantly, for our workforce, we typical companies have a mid 70s performance rating from their own employees. We range between 85 and 95 because we take that science, that culture, that DNA that our founder built, and we provide it to them in very unique ways. And so we'll talk about some of them today under what we call our Readiness Culture Code. But we're proud of the fact that we invest an awful lot on the human being first, the team second, the organization third. I think that's pretty unique.
So you just briefly mentioned the Readiness Culture Code. Can you tell us what that is and why y'all created it?
Absolutely. So I'll start with my own personal journey because I'm not alone. Like every other company and a lot of other people, I was having a hard time kind of figuring out how to define myself after 10 and a half hours of video calls every day, dealing with pandemic related issues that were pretty real and pretty severe. So it really, our journey started with others, but in my case, I raised my hand at the end of 2002 and said, I have to rethink this. I am not bringing what I need to be bringing to my organization as the head of and chief advocate of an organization. And we basically started this concept, and I started of kind of, I need to declare calendar bankruptcy and just clear my calendar. And then have conversations with people on, do I need to still have those meetings? If so, how frequent, how long, what's the purpose of them? And get some of my day back to solve problems where I found, like many people, I was getting up early or staying out late, working late to try and do my day job. And so with that, we found out that was how most of our organization was feeling. You amplify the fact that our coaches have to be on and inspiring our clients, in person on camera, and that only magnifies the need to make sure if they're feeling what I'm feeling, we had to correct it. So we knew we had a problem. Two, I mentioned we're a company of coaches and science. And so we knew this is something we could solve. We've solved it for elite athletes in injury prevention, injury recovery. So we knew the science of the human body. We just had to apply it to the organizational side, which we did. And so we started thinking about what might we do different on how people are working. Calendar management was probably the easiest one because the world just figured out how to manage the business, but not move the organizations forward in the pandemic. So we really rethought kind of how we define our days. And the Readiness Culture Code is a playbook. It's not a handbook. It's not a policy. It's not from HR. It's really from a variety of different teams who came back and said, how might we get our work done differently? And how might we define success daily, weekly, quarterly, et cetera? And so that took us a while to come up with, kind of rethinking the status quo. And coming out of that, we did significantly change how we meet, how we schedule meetings, how we gather, how we decide on success, how we celebrate, and with a huge part of flexibility and recovery. Probably the shiniest part of this is our 4-day work week. We do have a 4-day work week. We call it You Do You Days. And why we call it that is because we do want people to figure out what brings them the ability to get up and finish the day in a good way. And for many people, that's closing the computer and the phone, spending time with my family, my significant other, my grandpa on the beach, me having my scary movies and bad food, all of those things we need. And some people want to get up and do work to be caught up and ready for Monday morning. The only rule we have on You Do You Fridays is you have to do it autonomously. You cannot connect with other workers in our organization. We're a client-based company. We have over 350 clients. So of course, there are days where we need to do that on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. But outside of client issues, we protect each other. And I will say, we went through a variety of failures before we got there. We tried half-day Fridays, we tried summer Fridays, we tried quiet Fridays, and all of those got breached pretty quickly, starting from the top of the organization. So that was a pretty big commitment for us. So all of those pieces kind of said, let's think about how we trust our employees to do their work differently with autonomy. It could be different time zones. For me, I tend to work 5 to 8 in the morning, get some other stuff done, go exercise, and come back while the world's catching up. So we created a little more flexibility in how we do that. And then, as I said, in addition to flexibility, we're really intentional about getting recovery because we've been doing that for athletes for 25 years. You know, we always say elite athletes train and perform about 10 to 12% of their week or their day. The other parts of that are fueling and recovering. And so we spend a lot of time using that same philosophy in our business.
If I understand it correctly, the Readiness Culture Code is really looking at how we can be more ready as a company to do the things that we need to do. And a key part of that is not just how we work, but it's how we rest. And by finding this optimal balance or this optimal integration, whatever you want to call that, that is going to mean just as a culture, we are ready to tackle on whatever challenge we're confronted with. Is that kind
That
of
is
the
all
general?
correct. Yes. And I think for us, we even take it down to your day. So we are big believers in micro breaks. So our calendars are never 30-minute meetings. They're 25. They're never 60. They're 50. We don't have meetings over 80 minutes. And when you do those, there's a very strong expectation that you're getting away from your computer during those micro breaks. So it's even to that level, Stephen, of detail. And then, of course, to your point about recovery. But our thought on the You Do You Fridays is it's not 52 extra days off. For us, the You Do You Fridays is intended to be when you have a condensed week all being done in the front end. Said differently, you are working full week's worth of work Monday through Thursday with the idea that you're going to have intentional recovery on Friday. It's not intended to just give you extra days off. That is not how we run our business. And so if that helps the concept, but all of that, it means intentionally when you're on and being intentional when you're off.
Yeah, I love that. I have been Daniel's boss for many years, and Daniel, I'll let him speak for himself, but I would describe myself as being a CEO who managed by like the inputs. So if I saw that people were in the office and I saw that they were engaged in the work, then to me that meant, the team was focused and engaged in their jobs. And so I was never a big believer in flexible work. I thought we had to be there and we had to be grinding. I don't think that is really that uncommon of a perspective. I think that is still the prevailing way that, people, particularly of my generation, I'm Gen X and maybe older, look at work. I think there's probably some generational and work related stuff that was indoctrinated in us. And I held on to that. And I held on pretty hard. Like, employees would come to me, and it started with Daniel, needing to make a life change and needing to work remotely from Dallas. And that's when I was like, okay, like Daniel working with us is more important than where he's actually doing the work. So I'm willing to make this bet. I'm willing to like take this risk. And then it evolved. And then, COVID happened. We immediately became a remote work company. And the next evolution was for us, Fridays off. And Fridays off was an absolute game changer, and I still hear from the employees that worked with us, like, that was so awesome because we got acquired last year. We sold the company, and the company was like, no. So what I think one of our employees asked for Fridays off, and they're like,
Yeah.
no, you
Yeah.
do not get, that's not, we are a Monday through Friday, this hour to this hour. They had a whole, a totally different approach. You could just see the excitement and joy, like just disengagement of our employees just increase slightly when they realize like, oh shit, we're going to have a traditional employer now. And so for me, I truly am bought in to, I don't know all of the methodologies and the practices that you guys advocate for, but what you're describing, I'm totally on board with. And I guess my next question is for the old heads like me, like, what has been the most effective way for getting kind of traditionally minded bosses or owners or CEOs to just look at this differently? I'm surprised after COVID and work from home that this is still a thing, but I'm just curious. It clearly is, because there are companies that are now mandating that people go back to the traditional way. So I'm just curious, like, from your perspective, what is that mindset difference for
Sure.
the executives that get it?
You're talking my passion, by the way, so I'll try and stay succinct on it. But I would say you said a couple of things I'll touch on quickly. One is, I think for us, as we're starting to spend more and more time with our clients, we had two examples in the last 3 weeks where we have been on campus with two of our clients, and the CEO was in the conversation around how we're rethinking the workday and how they work with more capacity, not less hours. I think that's an important thing. We're talking about building capacity through intentional work and recovery. That is a really important distinction versus working less. And we spend a lot of time showing the science of that and other workforce metrics that I'm happy to talk about. So that's just one thing. And in two of those examples, we talk about how your day is, and they both showed us their calendar being back to back to back, and they both said, I'm the problem. And they are the problem. And these are people we all know by name, their dinner table conversations and names. And so this is happening throughout still most of the organizations we work with. Two, I think you're seeing a little bit of an evolving sandwich of people's thoughts on being in the workplace, in the workspace, and in the office. Certainly what you referenced, Generation X and kind of millennial, hey, we should be in, this is how things get done. And actually what we're starting to see through our data is young college professionals, young college students coming out to be young professionals also want to be in for indirect learning and a variety of things. And their problem is the people they report to don't. And so this gap of mid-management, mid-senior management not wanting to be in, having security they don't feel like they need to be in, is really a workplace issue that we're going through. So back to your question, we talk about two things really pointedly with our clients and our CEOs. One is they have to differentiate what their employees are doing when they're in the building and when they're not, no matter what their philosophy is on Monday through Friday. If employees are coming in doing exactly the same thing in the same day with 3 hours of commuting and pay, you will never get them the way you want to. So we talk quite a bit about intentional. So in our example, Mondays and Wednesdays are largely autonomous days. You have to get think work done. Since we're not doing as many meetings, you're doing a lot of work asynchronously to keep the organization moving. Tuesdays and Thursdays in office, and for those of you who are remote, is very much about collaboration, debate, ideation, creation, and we've designated the days that way. And I think most organizations are starting to get to some type of routine like that. And lastly, where we talk to CEOs is at the end of the day, when we show them data and they hear that they're going to be quickly become competitively disadvantaged in the war of talent in their space. And that is happening in every industry. Tech certainly has had its challenge. You all well know, they probably started leading this problem with COVID. And so they went from a talent attraction issue to a talent retention issue, and figuring out how people are only working one job, and a lot of unique challenges in engineering and tech. But now banking is very much involved with kind of rethinking what they do. And we are working with two of those clients who are about to announce a total reset on how the banking industry works. I live and work in New Jersey, New York City, so I'm very familiar with it. So I do think that this is happening because I do think some of these CEOs we're talking to feel like it's happening and they don't want to be competitively disadvantaged in the war of talent in their industry.
So we had on Nick Bloom last week, and this was the topic that we discussed. He shared how there are, I think he said, 4 different versions of the 4-day work week. And one of them he describes as the magical version. And that's getting all of your work done in 4 days. You're not being asked to pull 10-hour shifts. It's really about just getting the work done. He says with the challenge with the magical version is that there's still not enough data to prove that it can actually work. You have some nonprofit data, you have some government data, but outside of that, there isn't much data for people to pull from. And I feel like the biggest blocker to shifting perceptions is having that data. And I feel like the number one question is around productivity. I'm curious, when you piloted the blueprint at Exos, what were like the 2 or 3 hypotheses that you had? Like, what was it exactly that that you set out to prove? And I'm curious, can you share some of the data or learnings from that experiment?
Sure. 2 parts to that. One, we wanted to partner with a credible outside company because we thought we had the unique ability and authority to solve this and prove it, which I'm proud to say 1.5 years into it, we have. So we did engage Wharton, Marissa Shandell, and Adam Grant on what they wanted if they were to partner with us on this. And so I'll tell you what their success metrics were. And then from our side, we wanted to look at sales performance and NPS. Our net promoter scores relates to our coaches, thousands of coaches performing in person or on screens to our clients. Are they showing up the same or better with the condensed work week? So those were really our biggest pieces. In addition to my little world, voluntary turnover, attractiveness to candidates, time to hire, all of those metrics for me to say, is our brand shinier for people to join and be more attractive and keep talent? And so I certainly have all of that, and all of those trended very, very positively. With Wharton, they wanted to know 2 things. They wanted to know if you were able to show up and perform at a different level than you did before this exercise. And we used 3 tools, and they used 3 tools to do that. Many of our organization are sports and fitness people, so they have wearables. So if they wanted to voluntarily provide their wearable data, we captured that. The second one was we did a 6-month pilot with them during our Readiness Culture Code, and they did 6 surveys throughout that. It was a very different survey than what a typical HR professional would do. It was 80 questions, and it had a lot to do with what they believed was statistically significant trends on how that person was performing in and out of work. And then third, we did look at Google. We are a Google shop. So we looked at productivity as it relates to emails, participation in emails, your calendar, how often people were meeting, who was in that meeting, and how work was getting done there. And then on the sales side for us, we had how was our sales and revenue goals going, which all of them went up about 200%. So in every category during that review period, and since that, it ended in October, our financial metrics, our NPS metrics, our sales and sales pipe metrics, and our employee NPS and our customer NPS are all significantly higher than they were when we launched this within March. So the numbers are fairly staggering to a point where we need to make sure people feel they're credible. The only other thing I would add to that, Daniel, I think is important, is I was really passionate on making sure this wasn't a self-described prophecy where, of course, you like an extra day off. So you're going to say everything's wonderful. I wanted to know how the managers and the leaders of the organization felt their teams were showing up and getting output done in 4 days versus 5. And so we did a fair amount of work against that. It's integrated into our bonus programs, into our performance management system. So we've done all of those, but I would say Wharton published theirs, and theirs was much more around how that human being was showing up every day, and the numbers were quite staggering. And on our end, it was much more around our business metrics and our workforce metrics.
Interesting. Yeah, one of the things that we noticed, we actually did an alternating 4-day work week. So every other week was a 4-day work week. And the reason we chose that is because we found that, and we tried a variety of different ways of doing it as well. And for us, there was every time were in the 4-day work week, or I guess we were getting feedback right after the 4-day work week, the feedback was always that the 4 days were compressed and typically filled with meetings, because we were taking any conversation that would have happened on the Friday, that would have been brought into the 4-day
Yeah,
work week, which meant the 4 days were like super compressed, and it almost felt like a little anxious that we had to work different. And so we offset that by having a 5-day work week, right?
yeah,
And there are other ways that we offered flexibility to just keep that flexible feeling of like the optimal way of working is your way. And so long as you can work whatever that is aligns with what we're trying to accomplish as a
exactly.
business, then we're good. But it was interesting. Like, I didn't expect that on the 4-day work week that we would actually need an alternating 5-day work week to just kind of counterbalance some of the unintended consequences of the
Mhm.
4-day week. And I share these details because I'm curious as to how you work with your clients on this. Like, I think there are a lot of companies that are still struggling out there, and they feel that it's like has to be one way or the other. And one of the things that I find so beautiful about hybrid work is it can be whatever. It's literally a hybrid, right?
Yeah.
It can be whatever way you want it to be. And so, should companies and leaders be thinking about this differently? Like, how do you partner with organizations and find that optimal way of performing for them?
Yeah. So we have about 400 work locations where our employees sit. So just to give you the idea of the complexity and the breadth of our company, it's a very complicated one. So I love what you just said, because in many of those cases, they have taken what we've said is we're bringing intentional workload with intentional recovery to create better performance. And we've given them the readiness culture playbook and said, here's how these tools will work. Go back and talk as a team and how might we implement this concept in our space. And to your point, Stephen, it's not all you do you Friday for all the reasons you mentioned and many others. So there are split shifts, there are staggered shifts, there are, hey, we're going to do it on Mondays, or we're going to do half the team's Monday and the other half is Wednesday. What we found was giving them that freedom in the framework to think about what is the organization trying to teach us, and therefore what do we want to teach our client around intentional recovery, flexibility, and what we call work plus rest equals success. So how do we get work plus rest to success, to flip that switch versus work plus success equals rest? That's a really important concept that we spend a lot of time coaching our coaches on. So that has, a year later, has sprung into a variety of different ways in which that happens. The other thing I would say, though, for us is that we found that a lot of our organizational clients want to tie this to their return to office or hybrid program. So, for example, for us, if they're saying Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which many companies are still doing, and they can give their employees Friday or autonomous Friday, and they might not call it a day off, they might call it our equivalent of a you do you. But in return, you only get that when you're in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. This carrot conversation is still very, very active in many, many organizations. As you said, many C-suites are quietly saying, I want everybody back to work. I have real estate costs. People are going to be more effective here, or I can hide layoffs with people who don't show up and thin my organization. All of that is very real in organizations. And so we find when we ask the questions, typical questions of what are you trying to solve with your organization, your talent, and your workplace in general, and we tend to bring in these concepts and tools and marry with whichever one of those challenges are right at. And what I would also say is we've yet to speak with a client at any size or an HR peer of mine in any conferences that aren't going through one of the three same problems. It's the first time in 34 years I've ever seen every head of HR trying to solve the same issue at the same time. I've never seen that before. And so the business case for change is very easy. It's figuring out the right tools and being authentic to their organization and their CEO on what they can or can't want to do.
And so you briefly mentioned working with some financial institutions on just like completely rethinking how work gets done there. I don't know if this is premature, but are you able to share anything
I'm
about
not
that?
able to share. What I
Okay.
would say though, Danny, what I would say is they have taken a step back and said, is this the future of work? Or is this a hangover of, and everybody will be back and we're gonna be ahead of it? And I think that conversation, and two, most banking has figured out how to do secure trading from home at a variety of different levels, very complicated topic. But for 2.5 years, the world had to figure that out, and they have that tool now, as opposed to a very easy conversation that the SEC won't allow us to run your business without it. So all of those things have been conversations most of 2023, and I would argue the beginning of this year. So I wouldn't say you're going to all of a sudden see a company in the banking or financial institute say we're a 4-day work week. But what I think you're going to see is they're going to tie it to a talent strategy of when they want people working, where they want them working, and what they're doing in those examples. And that will be a very big shift, in my opinion, in that space.
Gotcha. So not every company is lucky like Exos to have scientists internally to help run these experiments. But I feel like there is an appetite from a lot of HR leaders to do things radically different, whether it's testing a 4-day work week or it's rethinking how performance reviews are done or scrapping. Like there's a million ways that people want to completely rethink how work is getting done. And I feel like in order to do that successfully, you have to have these very structured experiments, right? Where there are like 2 or 3 metrics you're looking at. In your case, it sounds like it was NPS, sales, voluntary attrition, and time to hire. And then you have to like design this experiment in a way that everybody can get behind. You have to pick maybe 1 or 2 things. You can't do everything at once. There's a lot that I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot that goes into really thoughtfully designing an internal experiment. So I'm just curious, like any advice to maybe some smaller companies that don't have the same resources but have been thinking about doing something like this for a while, like any learnings from this 6-month pilot that others could benefit from?
Thank you. Yes, I'd say the biggest thing is we treated it like organizational change management. If most companies, regardless of size, you have a playbook on how to assess the change, what success looks like for that change, how you'll communicate what that is, why it is, what success looks like, and how we'll be doing it. So that's the first thing that we were very disciplined around, is we treated this as a very critical change management initiative across the globe, from a communication, project management, planning perspective, and that really kept us true. Two, the world has so many different voices as a workplace today: employee resource groups, advisory teams, employee engagement groups. And what we found was having them be part of this, as opposed to HR or the C-suite, has quicker buy-in. And it also made sure that what we were trying to do was actually what the workforce wanted and thought we needed to do to win in the new workplace. So I think those were 2 really important pieces for us. And the third thing that we've talked with groups, and although we do deal with mostly large clients, certainly in my network, speaking to all of you, I love talking to people about these things. And so in the heads of HR for smaller companies, we talk quite a bit about being authentic to your organization and your leader. And so the last point I want to make is sometimes this is not happening through the C-suite or even the CEO. Examples for us are people have decided to think differently about how they're going to work. The head of marketing. So the CMO decides with his or her team, we're going to do things a little different here. And for everyone else, here's how we're working. And they try in different places and try and get some momentum, take some of the risk and the unknown out of it and build momentum. And then lastly, one of the things I'm passionate around is we call it a pilot. We don't know. We don't know. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's what we think we can do. Here's what success would look like. And we're going to over communicate when we hit it. And when we miss it, we're going to tell you we missed it and what we're doing different and what you can expect with that change. And so going back to this change management blueprint, I think that's a super important piece for us. we have failed quite a bit in the last 18 months, and not just in the survey. And I'll share one or two examples briefly with you all because they were big ones for us. One was we didn't think everybody would look at this as extra time away. It was really intended to be extra recovery time for a full week within a shortened amount of period. And so it took me and others some time to realize, how do I communicate to you that that's different? So let's use this week as an example. Memorial Day was a holiday. This Friday is not a you do you Friday. It's a regular day. We are not going to reward just giving extra time. And it can be complicated if you don't communicate it thoughtfully, simply, and over. So that's one example. Two, not unlike any other company, that 90-10 rule or 80-20 rule, 80 or 90% of the organization is going to look left and right and hold each other accountable and say, this is a really special thing we're doing. But you're going to have 10 to 20% of the workforce you have to manage. And so we had to think differently on how we had calendars. And so we made everybody's calendars open to the public unless it was a very personal, private issue for you outside of work. That was a very big difference for them. So someone can get on Greg's calendar and see what my day is like every day. What am I doing? Who am I doing it with? And yes, there's a little bit of check the checkers and trust, but there's also running the business. And lastly, we want to say, if you are out, we want your calendar to reflect that, and we want to protect it. Now, if you're abusing that, that's a management issue. But those were two examples where a lot of our workforce does work at home or remote. And so, we do have to run a business. So trying to figure out how to identify those is just two examples. But back to your question, pilot and coming back every month with what's working, what's not. And I found our organization and many of our clients, the tolerance of employees when they know what you're trying to do for them is pretty high.
Earlier, you mentioned a partnership or working with Adam Grant. And is there more you can share about that? Were you guys working on research related? I know that Adam has spent a lot of time on the topic. I think he's even had a podcast with Nick Bloom, whom we interviewed, recently. And so I'm just curious to learn a little more about what involvement Adam had with some of the work that you were referencing earlier.
Adam and Marissa Shendell did work with our performance innovation team about what we were launching on the Readiness Culture Code. So the playbook, they didn't help author it, but they saw it and then they came up with what questions they wanted. This was not a partnership that was paid. So they had the right to say, if you want us, here's what we want. So I think that's your question. And what they wanted was they wanted to have a study and a company that was uniquely able to do this around, does more intentional recovery lead to higher productivity and sustainable productivity and performance? That was their goal. Their questions were exclusively their survey questions that they did 6 times during this 6-month period. So all of that was theirs. How they mined the data, where that data went, and how they interpreted our Google Suite data and performance management data was exclusively their right to do so and come back with their findings. So they wanted to have some type of proof that you can create this formula of success plus or work plus rest equals success. They really feel their science tells them that. The science we had with our professional athletes made us an attractive partner for them. And they wanted to see if we could bring that from the athlete space to the workplace. And so that was theirs. We will be working with us on a second project. And that second project is around the idea of quiet quitting and trying to understand this new phenomenon that's going on right now where catch me if you can for a lot of remote employees. And so there's a performance management issue and a management issue to it. And then there's just this phenomenon that they're interested in around the human being working from home and their engagement or lack thereof for their employer, how they work, how they come out, and how much energy they put into pretending they're working hard. Like, I don't want to speak for Adam or Marissa, but that concept is something that they're interested in talking to us more about now that we have the relationship established with them.
That's super exciting. On this second study that's coming up, it feels, again, very relevant to the conversations that we've been having. So earlier when I was describing radically different ways of doing things, something that comes up almost every episode is rethinking how you manage performance. It's like we're giving people more flexibility than ever with remote work or with things like 4-day work weeks and, you do you Fridays. And the fear is that people aren't actually doing their work. And to your point, in some cases, there are the minority of employees that are taking advantage of the system. There's like a performative aspect to it, right? Like I hear people say that they leave their Slack app open on their phone 24/7 so that it looks like they're always online. It's like little things like that. Like people are figuring out how to game the
Yeah.
system.
They're the mouse jigglers
Yeah, the
to
mouse jigglers.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm curious, like how I know you mentioned a little bit about this second study, but like how are y'all going to measure this? Like how are y'all thinking about measuring some of this?
I will not speak for Wharton, as you probably would have guessed, but I will tell you what we're observing in our organization with our clients is a couple responses to that. One, we found that high performers and low performers are still high performers and low performers in this environment. And we can go across the board in any talent study we're doing with any of our clients, including our own, that talent graph of output has not changed. Your high performers are going to figure out how to do it in whatever environment they're in and whatever time frame you ask them to do it. And your low performers are going to do it as long as they can until they get caught. And then in the middle is where you're focusing your attention to try and veer them towards the right instead of left. So I would say that is unequivocally what we're seeing in any organization we talk to, is that this environment isn't shifting someone's interest in being high or low performers. The second part I would say is different companies have different ways of learning what productivity is. So for example, as I'm sure you've heard, many companies are thinking about tracking when you're in the office and when you're not. And so using your example of catch me if you can, many of them didn't do when you exit. So they'd come in, have a cup of coffee and leave and come back at full. So there is this idea of how much energy is a human willing to give to fake their work. And I think that's a fascinating, relevant, timely conversation. So I would say how we measure it is probably our next podcast. But I would say that is a phenomenon that's going on a pretty broad base. And then lastly, I would say organizations are getting really savvy on figuring out who's gotten really savvy. And so at the end of the day, it's caught up. There are tools that I would say in 2022, 2023, people were doing that. There's articles about someone having 2 or 3 jobs. You didn't know it. It's the article about I work 1 hour and I'm proud of it. The tools that are out there to fake you're working on the computer, on your mouse, everywhere. The world and heads of HR and their related teams have caught up to that. And so I think there is a correction phase going on that just started about probably the beginning of this year. And I do think that will finish. The other thing I would say is the world has been in a talent-centric mode for 4 years through a global pandemic, which is unbelievable. But whether you believe we're about to head into a recession or a small one or not, I do think organizations are figuring out how to reset who their talent is, where they work, and how often they work in that space. And I'd say that has been across the board happening. And the people who are good at jiggering their mouse are the ones who will be impacted by that.
Yeah, you know, I'm kind of the dissenting view on well, I think there's probably a small group that may agree with me, but I feel that quiet quitting is not a new construct.
I
I feel
agree.
like that is an actively disengaged employee, and in a full in-office environment, you have the equivalent of an actively disengaged or quiet a person that's quiet quit. Like if we rewind 10 years ago, pre-pandemic, this existed, and they were in companies and they were wasting company dollars in the office. The same thing exists remotely, and I guess there's this belief that companies, because we were in the office, you could spot it more easily. But I had colleagues that I knew were not actively
Yeah.
engaged. They had quiet quit, and so this is just going to be a part of to me, this is always going to be a part of the workplace, whether you're in office or you're remote. There are some people that are going to put forth more discretionary effort than others, and I think the end goal is to get as many as you can, putting in that extra discretionary effort, in the time, in however that your particular company works. But I don't think we're ever going to eliminate those individuals.
I agree with you on all of that wholeheartedly and fully. Only piece I would say that's been different in the last 10 years is individuals being hired into new organizations where they didn't have that history of relationship. It is a lot easier to look at that job as a commodity versus a connectivity or a commitment to a human being. And so I think there's a little piece there that says I got hired on the computer by a manager in the computer and I work on my computer at home. That level of engagement is more vulnerable to quiet quitting than others. But as far as your comment that this is not a new issue, nor is fatigue in the workplace, by the way. Neither of these are new. They've just been compounded and studied and the HR function's kind of on stage right now because of the pandemic, and these things are being brought to light differently.
You mentioned earlier that there have been some failures over the last 18 months. And I imagine with this pilot and, You Do You Fridays being a component of this pilot, that there were some kinks in the 4-day work week at the beginning. And even now, I imagine it's never going to be perfect. But when you think about, I guess, the next iteration of the 4-day work week at Exos, how can it still be improved there at your company?
Great question. The biggest piece for us and for me is we had the organization come up with the playbook and the Readiness Culture Code, and HR largely led it because there was compliance issues to that. There was daily overtime. There's a lot of complexity to how people are going to be scheduled and paid. What I would do different, what I am trying to do different now is we're now at a point where we want to make sure we're equipping our operations and people leaders with the information, and they're leading the conversations and they're doing it at the next level of personalization that works for that particular team, as opposed to hearing it from the HR function and then having to interpret what that means for them. And so having our regional directors, for in this case, a large part of our business is under our operational teams or our coaches. So having those regional directors equipped and facilitating and owning these culture norms is much more effective than them having to be in the middle of it. So that's one big piece for us, is we're now at this stage where do we need to make more changes, make sure that middle management, that regional management's really tight on what it is, why, and what we're expecting to come out of it, and then holding them accountable to go back and look at this. The other thing I would say that's a big learning for us was we knew when we went out with this pilot, we were going to be going from promotion to permission to take Friday off, permission to challenge each other on, do I still need to have this meeting? And if so, what's it for? And where's the agenda? Where we are now that took work is we went from promotion to permission to accountability. And that accountability is actually happening at the peer level, which is way more effective than a hierarchy or coming from your manager. And so some of those took time, but some of it also was our learning that this can't be HR's voice at this point. We all know what we're trying to do. We all know the science. We all know our history. We all know what it could bring. Does everybody agree? You have to hold each other accountable to that. And the area that showed up the most was our ability to be disciplined around meetings. And when someone had a bad meeting or had a meeting just to have a meeting, their peers shared that with them, and that was a behavior norm that happened pretty quickly. That I think made a big difference in our ability to be successful with this.
The question that we've asked probably 4 or 5 guests in the last few months, because the topic, again, we're covering the same 3 or 4 topics every week now, and one of them is having a high performance culture. And I think that a lot of HR leaders understand that that's what they need to achieve, but it's hard for them to articulate what that actually means. And I think you just articulated that very well. It's almost cutting out all of the BS of work, like the stuff that's all the busy time, cutting out all the busy time, emphasizing rest and holding each other accountable. It's really pretty simple. And something that
I would add to it, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Dan. I would add to that one of our lessons with really clear output expectations.
Exactly.
That is a really important piece that we started being soft management on and realized how important that is to be hard-lined on.
And I think that's a perfect segue into what I was about to ask. So Nick Bloom shared, I can't remember the book that this is from, but he shared that how US productivity grows at about 2% per year, totaling a 242% increase since 1950. So we can now produce in 11.7 hours what we could produce in 1950 in 40 hours. And that stat kind of blew my mind. So on the point of like output metrics, is this going to continue to evolve over the next 20, 30 years? Because I imagine that productivity is going to continue to increase. Like, how does the work week continue to change? I don't really know if you have a good answer for that, but like at what point is enough productivity enough or like enough output enough?
I
It's
have a
never
point of view
enough,
on
Daniel. It's never enough.
it. Yeah, whether you're private or public, it is never enough. I would say the two things that we're trying to solve ourselves and for our clients is productivity is pretty straightforward on how to measure it. Your argument of when is enough is a different conversation, but at least you understand what success looks like as it relates to output. Where we are spending time is we're talking about the difference between productivity and effectiveness or efficiency. And those are two very different conversations. And so, in order to do that for us, we have to have very specific output expectations by team. So, as an example, yes, HR has metrics, and maybe turnover is one of them, or engagement and how it impacts the overall success of the organization. But we do it for technology, for brand marketing, for growth marketing, for finance. And the idea is it's not just how many hours did you work, because that's really not what we're interested in. Is what did that part of our business say they were going to do this month and this quarter that leads to the broader success of the company. And I do think that's evolving with technology. I do think that's evolving with dashboards. I think many companies take a practice like we have, which is you could choose 1,000 metrics. We have 15 we call metrics that matter. And either you hit those or you didn't. If you didn't, your team's got to regroup how you're working and what you're working on and reprioritize it. And that's where that level of accountability is very strong. And it's public. We're very public about where we're winning and where we're not, just like an athlete or a team would be on a scoreboard. And we think those are really important culture norms for us.
Generative AI. We haven't even talked about it. Is this something that you re-optimize around, or is this just like another productivity, tool in the tech stack? Like, how are you guys looking at generative AI?
A variety of ways, as you'd expect every company do. I would say we still believe it's a human sandwich. It's got to be initiated by a human, AI enhanced, and then a human either editing it, going back a second time, or finishing the output. So I would say we're not alone in that particular thought of how AI is used, whether that's for editorial, content, creative, et cetera. For us as a natural coaching company, we still believe you need a coach, and not a coach, but my coach. And so we use that to figure out how to take what the coach is inputting for personal optimization, nutrition plans, coaching plans, training plans, et cetera. So we are certainly looking at the fact that is a enhancing tool for our coaches to deliver personalized to an individual or group of individuals. So that's an area for me on the HR side. We use it quite a bit as we're starting to introduce kind of unique FAQs. We are a global company, so we have employees around the world. The world has become complicated, compliance, legal, things of that nature. So I think there's a space in that. I think for us and for me, I tend to say that AI is given permission in the following databases, so that there's a little less auditing of correct data as opposed to going out to the web and everything that means. And so I think companies are getting more and more sophisticated with it. But at the end of the day, we have quarterly AI meetings. There's an expectation in each part of our business, including mine, that we are innovating, ideating, and starting to think of how we will use it in as little risk as possible. And of course, there's the whole area of recruiting. I won't get into it on this call, but I don't believe AI is the solution for talent. I think AI can help with sourcing. I think AI can help with job descriptions, but I still believe it goes back to the human sandwich of using AI in the middle of that relationship.
And what have been as an HR leader, like some of the biggest challenges for you, just mobilizing the team around your commitment to spending X amount of time ideating and using generative AI tools for HR?
There are several. One is the obvious time. Like, where do you want me to prioritize? We're still kind of going through the COVID hangover in some areas of the function, in my opinion. But two, there are companies, and I use one example, Google, who's a client of ours, they still allow their employees to use 10% of their time for pet projects, ideation, do something that's unrelated. And I would say going back to high performers are going to continue to be high performers. Not everybody's going to be motivated to do that. We don't have that exact practice, but there are individuals in every function, in every team, in every company, including mine, who are very motivated to say what's next in AI and play around with it. And giving them the forum and the permission to do it, report out to bigger, in this case, HR team. Those are practices we're doing now. And the biggest area that I think we're going to learn quite a bit around is around talent management, talent acquisition. I think there's an awful lot there that's broken, people aren't talking about. And so putting aside adverse impact, diversity, inclusion, all of these other very real issues, there's also just the ability of, at what point does the human being matter versus what he or she's accomplished? And I think that stuff is still really has a lot to figure out. And so we're going through those journeys. Our head of talent is excited to be playing around with it. And in some cases, we're doing with a third party who's playing around with other companies, so the learning curve's quicker. But we're trying to be a fast follower versus a leader in some of these spaces. We're not a Fortune 10, 50 company that has those kind of resources to do that, but we love paying attention to it and trying to fast follow it and make it work for us.
And so, for everybody that's listening to the show right now, what's your call to action to them?
I feel we have a responsibility and obligation to have organizational courage that our functions never had before. I think most of what we're doing is new. There's not a playbook for what 2024 and 2025 are going to be, just like they weren't for the pandemic era. And so I believe we have to understand what's true to our organization, our culture, our mission, our leadership, what's working that we want to protect, and be incredible champions with organizational courage to think about how that can come to life in a new way. I do believe the workforce has changed. I believe the workplace has changed. And to influence individuals, our function doesn't have a lot of authority. Our function has a lot of influence. And so if we're effective at influencing peer levels, senior levels, organizations levels, on what we know is true and authentic to our brand or our business, that's a big call to action. That's a big ask for us to figure out how to lead change that doesn't have a blueprint. And no matter what company you're in, and no matter what CEO, I think all of us are being asked to be change leaders. And I think sometimes we can delegate that to other parts of the business that have the tools and the resources to do that. But I believe it's the chief advocate's responsibility to do that.
I totally agree. And I love that call to action. I believe that we are in the midst of the workplace being reimagined. And, to me, the reason why your call to action is so important, it's like, do I, as a people leader, want to be involved in influencing this newly imagined workplace, or do I want to see what happens and have to live with whatever the output is? I know what the answer is for me, and as a result, I'm taking that call to action. So we were at that point in the conversation, though, Greg. We got to turn the corner and not quite bring the conversation to a close yet, but we have a few traditions and rituals on the show that we need to complete before we do wrap up. The next of which is what we call rapid fire questions. Same set of questions we ask all of our guests. You ready to do this?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Awesome. First question. How do you define a modern people leader? What are the traits and characteristics?
Excellent communicator on the why. I think going back to change leadership, I think people understanding what are you trying to do and why and what that can look like. So I would say that's a really important piece. I'd say the second part is most organizations have built communities within your organization. So our ability to be really active listeners and seek out those different constituencies to understand how the organization is breathing is super important. So I'd say those two pieces are as profound right now as anything in my function.
Those are two really good ones. Question 2, if you could go back in time and talk to a 22-year-old you, what career advice would you give yourself and why?
I tell my young men, 23, 21, and 19, I always believed in humble confidence. And I think that's something that in a different way my father gave to me. But how do you make sure you have confidence? But humility is something that um, transcends in any environment. And when you work hard, when you ask a lot of questions and being naturally curious, which would be the second piece. So I would say humility and be thoughtful about asking questions that shows interest in learning. Those would be the two things that I continue to be passionate about and I look for in candidates.
Last question. If you could fix any HR people problem with a magic wand, what would it be and why?
COVID has been horrible for all of us for 1,000 reasons that I hope I don't need to get into. But what I would say for purpose of this question with the right context, I wish young professionals never could compare working from home full time as that being the new bar. I feel so strongly that there is importance in connectivity. There's importance in not having isolation and loneliness. There's importance in indirect learning and mentorship and observation and debate and disagreements that we're working from a new platform of 5 days from home. And of course, there's 1,000 other things way more important coming out of COVID. But I would say if I had that magic wand, it's really hard to be competing against that versus what used to be a 5-day work week. If you went to people in 2019 and said, I'm going to let you work 3 days a week, your scores would go off the roof and the world would be, your organization would be as happy as any in the world. That's what we're competing with. How long that lasts, who wins on it, all to be determined. But the bar of I get to work from home and do whatever I want and get really creative in how I do it is a real hard bar to try and manage an organization against.
And who should we bring onto the show next?
I'm fortunate that I've had many mentors in my life. One of them is a gentleman by the name of Todd McCarty. He's the head of HR for Cumulus Media. Todd is a extraordinary human being, extraordinary HR person, but also a really interesting background. He's been in media where he is now a couple times, both print and digital. He's been in gaming, he's been in hospitality, he's been in retail, and I think he would bring a unique vantage point to how some of the topics we're all passionate about, how he's looking at them from his perch.
We'll definitely reach out to Todd and we'd be honored to have him on the show. And that brings us to our last tradition, and that's what we call one word or phrase close. So it can be a word or few. And it's as we reflect on the last hour and change, amazing conversation we had, just a way to wrap things up, put a bow on it. And we prefer for our guests to go first. So
sure, mine will be a
Greg, if
phrase.
you could take it. Okay.
And my organization's tired of me saying it, but I like how might we. I think it's been a rallying cry as an organizational culture and change for us to say, how might we versus why can't we? And so I'm going to lean in on that one.
Love that. I'll go next. I'm going to go with you do you because I love that. And my daughter, Cora, it's like one of her favorite sayings. You tell her an opinion. She's like, oh, you do you.
Love it.
I'm going to say work plus rest equals success.
Yes.
Straight from your marketing materials.
My marketers will love you for it. And I'm so glad you're taking that away.
And I guess that's something that we didn't talk about. Like if I wanted to learn more about the coaching and the work that Exos does, like how do I find you guys? How do I learn more about some of these principles that we've talked about over the last hour?
Thank you. Certainly Exos, our website, but also Exos Immersions. We travel with our PhDs and C-suites, helping current clients and new clients, and we schedule those about every other month where we take about 30 to 40 heads of HR or heads of business, and we talk through their needs and talk through best practices. So love to talk to anybody interested in it, and we're certainly proud of the learnings we're doing and the clients we're working with.
I'd also recommend everyone go check out the Readiness Culture Code and some of the results that came out of that experiment. So I think if you go to the website, there's a link for that. I can include it in the show notes.
Thank you, Daniel. That'd be great.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. It's a lot of fun.
It was tons of fun.
My energy was like pretty low at the beginning because I have this head cold, but I'm feeling re-energized.
That's good. That's my goal. I work for company coaches. That's what we got to do every day.
Yeah, this was
Pleasure.
absolutely amazing, Greg. Thank you so much. Thank you for letting us drill in and ask more. We always want more, and you definitely delivered. So we appreciate the great conversation today.
I appreciate both of you. Thanks for the time and the conversation.
Talk to you later, Greg.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.